Happy as a butter clam, when tides are high I sing a grateful ode to Puget Sound, the land of everything. I love it from Tulalip, from Puyallup, Squim and Pished, and to the Dosey Wallops, where so many times I've fished.
Unlike most archaeological sites where a few stone artifacts, broken potsherds, or masonry remains might be found, Ozette contained a treasure trove of things that are normally perishable and hence rarely ever discovered. Sealed in the centuries-old mudslide were the perfectly preserved remains of a prehistoric culture, a complete inventory of life as it had once existed. Rich carvings of wood, whale harpoons, baskets, clothing, blankets, household furnishings, thousands of specimens of all types. The material possessions of a maritime-oriented people who exploited the resources of the adjacent reefs and were particularly skilled at hunting whales and fur seals. 6, maybe 10,000 years ago, they were already there along the northwest coastline, the people of the whale. Just when they arrived, of course, is a matter of geologic estimate. But there's nothing to suggest that they weren't there shortly after the beginning of the ice-free age. This week, we explore the western tip of Washington's Olympic Peninsula near the entrance to the Strait of Juan de Fuca on what is now part of the Makah Indian Reservation, where the remains of their rich and elaborate culture now furnish us with an unparalleled glimpse of the past. Our subject, the first in a two-part adventure involving the people of the whale. For untold centuries, life has swirled around this westernmost point of land in the continental United States. Jutting into the Pacific Ocean, its glaciated shoreline contains the debris of hosts long dead. The populations of the past, who played their parts and were succeeded by new multitudes. Some can be traced by their litter in the shallow surf which saw their end, while others, the more ancient ones, lie buried deep in the layered mantle which once formed their world, a world which tapped the highest level of prehistoric culture in North America. Here, long before New Bedford, long before Jonah even, they harvested the mammals of the deep. The gray whales, which for thousands of years have passed by here, moving north and south again in the fall to the calving grounds off California's Baja Peninsula. To the north were the Nootka and the Nitnat, and below the mouth of the strait, the Macaw, the Quileute, and the Hoe. These were the whalers. And at the top of the list were the Makah Ozette, armed with sealskin floats and sinewed line. Their harpoon shafts struck swift and deep. Their whaleboat, the dugout canoe. And all around them, the relentless force of the sea and the spirit world, which gave them strength to do the thing they had to do. Today, the sea itself has helped reveal that which had long been hidden in the rubble of time. In March of 1970, High tides and heavy wave action collapsed a section of bank at the old abandoned Ozette Indian village at Cape Alava, revealing what appeared to be a few sharpened stakes and some cedar planks. To the trained eyes of Dr. Richard Doherty, head of Washington State University's Department of Anthropology, this was enough. Called at the request of an alert Makah leader named Ed Klaponaho, he identified it as the partially exposed remains of an Indian house, which had been buried in a mudslide centuries before. Ravaged by storms and erosion, the northwest coastline had disgorged a find of major importance. A month later, thanks to vigorous action on Doherty's part, an appropriation from the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the cooperation of the Makahs, on whose land the discovery had taken place, salvage operations were in full swing. Because of the isolated nature of the site, initial supplies were airlifted in by chopper, a Coast Guard helicopter operating out of the Port Angeles Coast Guard Station. In the months to come, they would continue to lend invaluable assistance with resupply. Everything was dumped on the beach. It was either that or pack it in over the 4-mile trail from the Ozette Ranger Station. In the background, the familiar outlines of Cannonball Island, a favorite landmark to hikers who had long prowled this beach line, little suspecting the archaeological treasure over which it stood guard. We had worked with Doherty once before in the Palouse country of eastern Washington, a filmed account of the finding of the Marmas Man, the earliest known human remains in North America. Since 1966, working under a grant from the Federal Sciences Foundation, he had also conducted large-scale operations here on the coast, part of a planned program involving a long period of archaeological explorations, which included testing the offshore islands, along with substantial excavations on the mainland. His second in command was Operations Manager Jerry Grosso, in charge of construction, supplies, and maintenance. First up was the A-frame for shelter, then the main building, which would serve as a center of operations. Once camp was established, they set about removing the massive accumulation of slide material under which the house was buried. Working with limited funds, they started with one pump. Later, more would be added as funds became available. Pumping 40 gallons per minute from the sea, under 250 pounds pressure, they were able to slice through the overburden, most of which consisted of heavy, dense blue clay. During his earlier excavations in the area, Dr. Doherty had determined the presence of life as far back as 6,000 years. Now, by means of this unique method of hydraulic archaeology, he hoped to uncover further evidence of those earlier manifestations. Starting at the top of the more recent levels, a connecting grid system located everything horizontally. If these levels were removed, the stakes are reset. Chuck Simpson is an anthro major at WSU. Bruce Peterson specializes in math. Each typical of many young scientists-to-be who peer at the past through granny glasses and are hopeful of reshaping the future. The excavation centered on the one house, but there were more. At various times during the centuries of occupation, a series of mudslides had swept down on the village, smashing and burying the houses. Because of the protection of the offshore islands, the set each time was eventually reoccupied. The sudden nature of the events and the chemistry of the soil had sealed off the deposits. Bacterial action and oxidation had ceased. Smaller hoses dislodged the artifacts without harm. Sealed in a clay tomb, they had been preserved by nature itself. To protect them from disintegrating, they were placed in preservative tanks containing polyethylene glycol, a water-soluble solution which replaces the water in the cell structure. Each item was carefully tagged and turned frequently to ensure maximum penetration. Connie Taylor, a WSU student, had also worked on the Marmas site. There, she had dealt with meager clues. At Ozette, however, the artifacts emerged in endless abundance. A cedar box bent on grooves and held by wooden pegs. A family dipping bowl, still smelling of seal oil. A basket containing red ochre. Used by some ancient artist, its rich color still discernible, despite the passing of the centuries. By August, more than 1,000 artifacts had been removed, and only the surface had been scratched. But finding the artifact was not enough. Along with what and how and why, they must also determine when. Here, centuries are measured in inches, each revealing layer of sediment and soil carefully measured and drawn to scale, like a vivisection of Earth itself. In tracing the stratigraphy, Madeline Perry examines each layer and matches it with known values for future identification. At the level of occupation estimated at 500 years, the level at which the house was located, green leaves were found in the slide material. It had happened in the spring. To people like this, there's a certain wonder in the unraveling of the past, and the thought that others, long before them, had known the beauty of Ozette. Unlike most archaeological sites where a few stone artifacts, broken potsherds, or masonry remains might be found, Ozette contained a treasure trove of things that are normally perishable and hence rarely ever discovered. Sealed in the centuries-old mudslide were the perfectly preserved remains of a prehistoric culture, a complete inventory of life as it had once existed. Rich carvings of wood, whale harpoons, baskets, clothing, blankets, household furnishings, thousands of specimens of all types. The material possessions of a maritime-oriented people who exploited the resources of the adjacent reefs and were particularly skilled at hunting whales and fur seals. Many of the objects were easily identifiable. Many were not. These were labeled NTDK. Nice thing, don't know. But regardless of identification, each item was drawn, described, and cataloged in minute detail, even the position in which it was found. Checking the wall alignment, the south wall ran east and west true. They had found the south wall intact. The east wall extended north about 65 feet, but they had yet to find the end of it. The houses were placed fronting the beach and built of planks split from cedar. The larger dwellings were intended to accommodate several families. The interior presented a domestic scene. In the center was an open fire pit, around which the people could sit or eat or talk, as the case may be. Whale drawings adorned the woman's hat. Further north, the clan structures traced the mother's side. But among the whalers, there was a bilateral kinship reckoning, with emphasis on the male line. The villages were located inside the mouth of streams or in bays. Ozette, protected by offshore islands, was an ideal location, providing good anchorage for the canoes, plus the resources of the reef. Aided by additional funds procured from the Bureau of Indian Affairs and administered by the National Park Service, the Ozette project moved steadily forward. The degree of progress measured in part by the increasing array of water pumps which flank the beach line. Linking 3 pumps to a hose increased the volume to 120 gallons per minute at 250 pounds pressure and permitted a more efficient method of extending the excavation. To determine the length of the house, they systematically sampled the upper levels, unit by unit, with 2-meter cuts, leaving a place in between to get the stratigraphy off the sidewalls. Following the incident of the poisoned jellyfish, protective clothing became mandatory. A jellyfish tide had clogged the saltwater intakes and were sucked into the pumps. Under 250 pounds pressure, the pulverized remains proved somewhat lethal to several of the operators who had been hit by the spray. While sunny skies are not infrequent, the precipitation at Ozette averages 180 inches per year, and the rainy season extends from fall through spring. This centuries-old rain hat had been woven from spruce root and coated with a layer of smashed salmon eggs to make it waterproof. A painstaking piece of handiwork, complete even to a sweatband. Like the other items, it too had been preserved by the action of the slide. Containers, baskets, clothing, even sails have been woven from the natural fibers of root and tree. Prior to the white men, very little clothing was worn by either sex, except during the wet, colder months, when, in addition to the hat, they wore robes made of skin or woven from dog's hair or pine bark. To protect the marine biology of the reef, a special dike was constructed to contain the mud the high tides of winter would carry it away. Drawing from the resources about them, the ancient ones had fashioned their everyday needs, an art which, even today, finds expression among the Makahs.
Loretta, now you watch me, Loretta, how I start this, and you, next time you start it yourself.
Here at nearby Nia Bay, a class in basket weaving learns of the old ways. Just as in the past, the material is spruce root. The teacher is Mrs. Isabel Idis, one of several instructors at the Nia Bay School specializing in native arts and crafts. But this is the land of the Makah. And along with the modern, one senses a strong undercurrent of the past. Under the expert guidance of Nora Barker and Ethel Klopanaho, the young students are also taught the Makah language.
Try to make that sound. Ka-uk. Ka-uk. Knife is the same thing. A kayak. A kayak. No, don't say kayak. Say a kayak. Mm-hmm. Head. Lips. Mouth. Hair. Eyes. Nose. Teeth. Ears. Hands. Feet. Stomach. Ankle. Tongue.
Wrapped in impenetrable obscurity, most of their history has been lost in myths and legends. Here we see only the recorded evidence of the later years. Yet merging with ours, their early culture helps us comprehend our own, as each act of the life story prepares the way for the next, as each new form of life expands over what has gone before and builds upon the past. How many generations have potlatched at Tatoosh or journeyed there to fish for salmon? No one knows. What has become obvious, however, is that nowhere in the United States is there a more complete collection of materials representing the culture of our prehistoric past. And in the space of 1 year, The Ozette site, seen here in the final stage of occupation shortly after the turn of the century, has emerged as a major educational resource. For in seeking to determine his destiny, man cannot look beyond, for the play is not yet finished. Tied to the ever-changing surface of the earth, he can only learn by looking backward. Here at Ozette, there were times when the cook would gladly have traded his balky cook stove for a dependable fire pit. There was something to be said for prehistoric culture. During the peak of the summer season, the dig crew had expanded considerably, and the chow line bulged with professional and volunteer workers. Moving quickly through the levels influenced by the white man, the Washington State Archaeological Team was now exploring the contents of the house itself, a house which probably had been standing about the time Columbus set out to discover America. Despite the chasm of time, a warm bond of community had developed between the present population and the site's former residents. For once again, after a lapse of many years, there were people living at Ozette. While his mother, Jan Friedman, a member of the team, looked on, young Danny Friedman celebrated his 5th birthday in time-honored fashion. Today, as children seeking answers, we probe the hazy outlines of the past. Already we have learned something. For thousands of years, a people had once lived along this northwest coastline, at peace with their environment. The people of the whale.
Next week, we conclude our adventure with a first-hand look at one of the more fascinating aspects of this remarkable story, as Dr. Richard Doherty and the Washington State Archaeological Team uncover the remains of a whaling culture which existed in the dawn of the ice-free age, and the Makah people reveal plans for a museum to house their priceless collection of artifacts. I hope you'll join us. Till then, this is Don McCune reminding you that it's all on Exploration Northwest. 5 centuries ago, when a catastrophic mudslide engulfed part of the Ozette Indian village, it entombed a complete inventory of life as it had once been, when Ozette was one of the principal villages of the Makah Indians occupying this northwest portion of the United States coastline. Pounded by storms and undermined by erosion, the discovery had taken place when a section of bank had given way, revealing part of an ancient longhouse. For thousands of years, the Makah Ozettes had harvested the mammals of the deep, and encased in that mudslide were the perfectly preserved remains of their prehistoric culture. This week, the conclusion of what has been hailed as one of the more significant archaeological finds in America, the story of the Makah Ozettes, the people of the whale.
Now, the Washington State University archaeological team stationed at Ozette, resupply took place on the average of once a month. Since no roads connect with the site, only the 4-mile trail from the ranger station at Ozette Lake. Dr. Richard Doherty, head of the anthropology department at WSU and project leader, had arranged for assistance from the U.S. Coast Guard at Port Angeles, Washington. In the months to come, the Marine Air Reserve would also lend a hand. All told, some 100,000 pounds of supplies and equipment were hauled in by air. 35,000 pounds were packed in over the trail. And by midsummer of '70, the Ozette Dig, located on the westernmost point of land in the continental United States, was the largest archaeological project on the Washington coast. It extended for over half a mile along the beach. John Mobley, assistant to operations manager Jerry Grosso, had planted a garden shortly after they arrived, and all summer long there was fresh produce for the table. There was also a fresh water system on the hill behind camp, and the crew took turns doing the laundry. Even here in this idyllic setting, archaeology was dirty work. By now, the excavation had extended north a distance of some 65 feet. They had located the south wall of the house intact, but had yet to find the north end of the east wall. As was the custom, the planked houses had been built fronting the beach, the larger dwelling accommodating several families. In working the stratigraphy, they had tried to maintain a 1 centimeter accuracy in their dimension. The whole idea was to record enough information with the grid systems, the profiles, the shooting in of the artifacts with levels, so that they could reconstruct everything back at the lab on paper. Like a giant jigsaw puzzle, each piece had a place. Nothing was isolated. Everything related to everything else. By sealing off the air, the mudslide had preserved even the wood and fiber materials which normally deteriorate. Everything from woven bark to split cedar planks with which the house had been built. Burdened by the slide, sections of the house had collapsed. Yet even the most fragile fragments remained, almost as if it had happened yesterday. The planks still bore the paint and the imprint of the wolf and the thunderbird. To the ancients, the thunderbird was a twofold character, a supernatural being in the form of a gigantic Indian, whom the Nootkas called Tuktuch, or Tatoosh, as we know it today, who when hungry arrayed himself as an immense bird, and armed with the lightning fish, preyed upon the whales. These are members of the senior high school class at Nia Bay, now the center of the Makah Reservation. Today, show-card color has replaced the ancient dyes, and beaver teeth have given way to sharp steel. But the thunderbird can still be seen in the land of the Makahs. As for whaling itself, the last whale taken was in 1909. It was killed by Ethel Klapanaho's father. The picture she holds in her hands was taken at that time.
You think you could catch a whale?
Yeah.
You think you could?
They're mean.
They're mean. Yes, they are. They're big, aren't they? You know, the Bible tells us to go alone in your closet and pray. Well, way back there, they went out into the woods, and they prayed. And
like going to the moon, whale hunting was not something everyone did, and preparation was a never-ending ritual. When in March of 1970, funds had been made available by the Bureau of Indian Affairs to start the Ozette project, Dr. Richard Doherty had estimated it would take until mid-September to complete the excavation. At the time, however, he was not aware of the unbelievable richness of the site, nor that in excavating this house, he would locate 4 additional structures. All told, 6,000 artifacts passed to the Ozette Field Lab during the first season of operation. To prevent disintegration, all items were preserved in polyethylene glycol to replace the water in the cell structure, with the treatment taking place either in the lab itself or in larger preservative tanks outside. Typical of the items found was this whale harpoon head made of shell. Despite the fact that today's archaeologist has many techniques at his disposal, what is eventually learned about the culture of the prehistoric inhabitants of this earth depends primarily upon the amount of culture material which has survived. Here at Ozette, a centuries-old calamity had created a form of time capsule, which contained not only a complete inventory of the material possessions of a maritime-oriented people, but tangible evidence of a highly advanced culture. An ornately carved comb, dipping bowls still smelling of seal oil. A carved bear's head decorates this one. Filled with oil, they were used to dip dried fish in before eating, and like other well-used household items, were around all the time. A canoe baler, its contoured outlines as practical today as they were then. A carved spindle whorl added significant information concerning their technology of weaving. Halibut hooks made of spruce root and barbed with bone. A carving of a seal's head adorns a killer club with which the hunter disposed of the harpooned seal. Even viewed in the evidence of historic times, this was an area of economic abundance. There was excellent halibut fishing in the deep banks off Cape Flattery. Next in importance was the salmon and the codfish. Like agrarians harvesting the land, the Makahs were experts at harvesting the seasonal runs of fish and mammals. How long this had been going on, one could only guess. But based on the ice-free date of this coastline, there's nothing to suggest that this area had not been inhabited for 10,000 years or more. Perhaps the secret was here, in a time capsule called Ozette. As summer progressed, hardly a day passed without visitors. Members conducted tours 5 times a day. Weekends and holidays took the brunt of it, and one day in August, 1,000 people hiked the 4-mile trail from the ranger station, including this group of Makah kids led by Don Buckingham, coordinator of Indian programs at Neah Bay. Ironically, it was the establishment of a school at Neah Bay which marked the end of Ozette as a village and the beginning of a long-standing dispute between the Makah and the federal government over who owned the site. In the early 1920s, Ozette had been abandoned when the children were forced to attend school in Neah Bay. For many years afterward, the government claimed the Ozettes and the Makahs were 2 different people. What was found here, including this wooden wedge, was ancient evidence for the plaintiff. To the east and the south, the people were different, but not here. Ozette was Makah. Thus, as a result of this archaeological discovery, By fall of 1970, the federal government, by congressional action, returned to the Makahs the 700-acre reservation, and Ozette was back where it belonged. With the use of high-pressure hoses, the WSU team had now succeeded in exposing a major portion of the house itself. In the weeks to come, by carefully mapping the remains, they hoped to plot the interior arrangement and its furnishings. Beneath this one, they had discovered 3 more layers of occupation, each covered by mudslides. As the generations had passed, each time the houses had been rebuilt. They had traced the path of progression down through the centuries to the beach itself. With the arrival of fall, the camp buildings were covered with shakes in preparation for winter, and a reduced crew labored to put in a supply of firewood. As in the past, they relied upon the bounty of the sea, the drift logs which washed ashore. For the ancients, however, the job was not so easy. Theirs was the age of stone axes and mussel shell wedges. But from these forest giants, they had split the cedar planking for their homes. Like beavers ringing a tree, they had felled the larger ones and carved them out to obey their will. With them, they had fashioned a maritime culture, raided their enemies, and extended their trade. And today, their blood flows in the veins of these, the coastal Indians, who formed the backbone and the brawn of our early Northwest culture. A culture class from the Nia Bay High School dances for the Makah elders in the multipurpose room. The occasion, a general meeting of the tribal council and the people of the village. The purpose, to assist in raising funds for the continuance of the Ozette Archaeological Project and the formulation of plans for the construction of a museum and a research facility at Nia Bay to house this treasure. In contrast to many such projects, this one represents a history of continuous occupation and links together a possible 100 centuries of man in the New World. Legend has it that this land was once level and good, till Quati, the mink, killed a wolf. Avenging the death of their leader, the wolves captured the wily mink. He escaped by changing the land into rocks and water and diving into the sea. In this way, Nia Bay was formed and the rocks a flattery. The wolf dancer is Harry McCarthy.
My mother used to get me up in the morning and send me down the creek to dunk, and ask our Heavenly Father to let me grow up to be a man, strong, able to catch game. My father would go out for 10 days, leave the house, go out in the woods to be able to catch the whale, get up to the whale, harpooning distance. I seen his gear when I grew up, what he used. He used the human bones, had them tied together, the whole thing wired together, and put it on his back. and then travel in the water as a, imitating the whale, how it goes up and down and spout. And that's why they claim when you harpoon your whale, that whale is going to die.
The harpoon consisted of a barbed head to which was attached a line, always of the same length, about 5 fathoms or 30 feet. Made of whale sinews, it was exceedingly strong. The staff was made fast to a sealskin float, taken from an animal whole and turned inside out. Inflated like bladders, they were attached to the whale in great numbers to help support the stricken mammal. The canoes carried 8 men, 1 in the stern to steer, 6 to paddle, and the harpooner in the bow. Since the kill was made at close range, the approach demanded great skill. Once the whale was dead, it was towed ashore, if possible, to one of the villages, and all hands stripped the carcass. That part between the head and the dorsal fin, called the saddle, was deemed the most choice and went to the one who first struck the whale. In facing the giants of the deep, special qualities were demanded of the whaler, without which they could not succeed. This ceremonial replica of a whale's saddle is evidence of the deep-rooted ritualism inherent to the whaling culture. For more than an economic necessity, whaling was an integral part of their religious and social life. Thus, the whale's saddle occupied a position of importance in the house of the whaler. Made of cedar and studded with 700 sea otter teeth, this one, found in the ruins of the house, may be a clue as to how people and ideas once spread around the Pacific Rim. For there's a striking similarity between the whaling ceremony and equipment of these people and those of the Western Eskimo. If so, this would mark an important step in man's knowledge of man in the New World. Not far from the house were uncovered the skeletons of several whales. They had been killed sometime before Columbus discovered America. Six, possibly 10,000 years ago, they were already here, the people of the whale. By fitting together the pieces of Ozette, we may find the answer.
Today, a museum has been built to house the priceless collection of artifacts, and archaeological teams continue to probe at the remains. Hardly a week goes by without some new and exciting discovery. Exploration will return to the site for another fascinating look at what has been hailed as one of the more significant archaeological finds in America. Next week, another exciting adventure. Till then, this is Don McCune reminding you that it's all on Exploration Northwest.
As happy as a butter clam when tides are high, I sing a grateful ode to Puget Sound, the land of everything. I love it from Tulalip, from Puyallup, Squim and Pish, and to the Dosey Wallops where so many times I've fished.
And I'm supposed to have some brown bread today.
Yep.
Okay.
From Brennan to the Bogoshiel, from Lemmy to Lapush, and from the lordly Salda to the lovely Duck Bush. From Samish to Sammamish, from Suquamish to Quilcene, the climate is so friendly, it's a land that's evergreen. There's Jimicum and Stillicum, where spouts the gooey duck, the singing Stillaguamish and the swirling Skookum Chuck, and Mulclips and Copalis, where the razor clams abound. A little bit of heaven is a shack on Puget Sound. There's peace on the Skokomish, on the Queets, and on the Hoe. There's calm on the Nisqually, born of ageless ice and snow. A land that nature loves so much, she stays a whole year round. I'd trade a royal palace for a shack on Puget Sound.